We begin again in love. Covenant. Covenant is one of the keystones of the Unitarian Universalist faith. It is an important part of our history, it is an important part of our present, and it is an important part of our future. So what is covenant? This explanation comes from the Commission on Appraisal report, Engaging Our Theological Diversity. Mutual promises flow from a shared covenant and draw Unitarian Universalists closer to our unifying core than individual claims can manage. Unitarian Universalism summons us to, quote, pledge our troth, an old-fashioned phrase that marries both truthfulness and trust to one another, forging our individual religious journeys together. Promises must be risked openly and publicly, unlike beliefs, which can be held in the privacy of one's own soul. Promises are fulfilled only in communal life. Promises require companions and signal institutional allegiance. Promises remind us that we are connected and beholden to sisters and brothers in our chosen faith. We are spiritual kin, bound together in the interdependent web. Promises support partnerships through fair and foul weather. Promises foster and sustain beloved communities. In reality, congregations, like couples, can crack and rupture for plenty of legitimate reasons. However, breakups frequently occur because life appears greener elsewhere, because conflicts escalate without redress, or simply because of boring stretches. Hence, mature promise-making encourages partners and parishioners to calm down, breathe deeply, and stay at the welcome table. Unitarian Universalist minister David Blanchard penned wisdom applicable to covenantal bonds of all sorts in his meditation manual, A Temporary State of Grace. Do more than simply keep the promises made in your vows. Do something more. Keep promising. As time passes, keep promising new things, deeper things, vaster things, yet unimagined things. Promises that will be needed to fill the expanses of time and of love. Keep promising. Promises remind us to remain firm yet flexible, to choose again what we chose before. Promises prompt us to keep an evergreen awareness in our interpersonal and institutional lives, to grow where we are planted, and as necessary, to do some repotting. So from this, we learn that covenants are an important piece of our faith. It's how we are together. It's how we stay together. It's what holds us as a community. Covenants are important in our congregations, and we find them everywhere. We have covenants in all of our RE classes that the teachers and the students are expected to abide by. We have behavioral covenants in our congregations that outline how we expect each other to act in our community. We have board covenants and committee covenants. But exactly how do we use those covenants? Do we revisit them, stay true to them, revise them when necessary? In a classroom setting, and I'm a religious educator, so I'm very familiar with this setup, a covenant only stays effective for a church year. The next year, it's a new class, and a new covenant is part of the first day's activities. When a new person joins the class, the covenant is reviewed, and they are asked if they agree. Board covenants are renewed and reviewed every year when new members are elected and join the board. It offers an opportunity to talk about these promises and expectations and reconsider them. But what about our congregation-wide covenants, like our behavioral covenants? Do we revisit those on a regular basis? Do we advise individuals about these covenants when they join and listen if they have objections? How do we manage these situations? And more importantly, what do we do when covenants of any type are broken? How do we repair and reform our community? This is the piece we seem to ignore. We make promises, but we don't consider what to do if the promises get broken. Your welcome song to this service was "Come, Come, Whoever You Are." This is a very familiar hymn to many of our members, and it's often sung as a representation of how accepting we are. We welcome everyone as they are. And if you look at this hymn in our hymnal, you will know that it is a hymn adapted by the poem Rumi, and a line has been left out. The poem actually reads, "Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, it doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come even if you have broken your vow 100 times. Come, come again, come." So if you look in our hymnal, what's left out is the line, "Even if you have broken your vow 100 times." We welcome you even if you've broken your promises. It's as if we don't want to acknowledge that promises and covenants get broken. We are conflict avoidant, and we don't want to talk about the messy work of fixing things when things go wrong. I mean, we're human. That's true. So let's think about this. When we have a covenant in a classroom and someone breaks the covenant, what do? Usually the teacher, sometimes a student, says, "That's not part of our covenant," and the person who's broken the covenant says, "Oh, sorry," stops their behavior, we hope, and everyone goes on. But what happens when a board or committee covenant is broken? When someone comes to a meeting unprepared? When someone doesn't allow other opinions to be voiced during the meeting? When someone cross-talks during discussion? Do we call them on it? Do we point out their error? Or do we ignore it because we don't want to get confrontational or be in conflict? Do we hold the covenant sacred or give in to the discomfort? It varies depending on the personalities on the board or the committee. But unfortunately, more often than not, we ignore the behavior. And when we do that, the covenant no longer binds the group together. Some groups actually read their covenant at the start of every meeting as a reminder of what they have promised to do. Congregational covenants, such as behavioral covenants, often have a procedure or process of reconciliation that goes with them. Sometimes this is called a disruptive persons policy, and I know you folks have one. But do we follow those? Or do we ignore the behavior that is in violation of the covenant in the interest of keeping the peace, and only use the policy when behaviors are extreme? We need to become better at calling those who've broken covenant back into covenant with us. We need to agree a mistake has been made and that we are going to begin again in love. Those who have broken the covenant own and admit the mistake. Those who've been affected by the broken covenant forgive those who have broken it. This isn't a perfect system. We're human. We hold grudges. It's hard to forgive. We don't like to admit when we're wrong. But it's how we go forward. It makes the process complete. And this is one of the few places in our lives where we get to practice these skills. Rarely are these sorts of processes found outside of the church anymore. This is how rules and covenants differ. Breaking rules usually require some sort of punishment or loss of privileges. If you do X, you can no longer do Y. Covenants aren't the same. When a covenant is broken, the community calls the person back into covenant by asking the question, can you recommit to be with us under these guidelines again? Can we trust you? This method of conversation and learning to hold covenant is a skill our society is losing. Many of us are entrenched in our side, in our beliefs, and we cannot hear what the other has to say. Covenant invites dialogue. Why do you feel that way? What brought you to that conclusion? How can we make this work for everyone? How do we forgive? How do we adapt and go forward? Covenants are the glue that hold us together. Re-covenanting processes are the skills that make living together as a community possible. And like other skills, coming back into covenant as a community is something we should plan a process for, be intentional about, practice, and review regularly. Do we do that? Businesses and many other kinds of groups exist purely for the sake of accomplishing their stated goals. The people come together for the sake of their common purpose. For religious communities, on the other hand, being in community is its own goal. And since communities are made of imperfect creatures, falling short of that goal is inevitable. It means that any covenant that lacks a process for reconciliation will inevitably fail. So think about the community of this church and the smaller communities within it, the small group ministries, the committees, the board, the RE classes. What are the covenants that hold them together? Are they explicitly stated or not? Because we can have understood covenants as well. Are they reviewed regularly? Or do members just assume someone new will figure it out on their own? And when someone falls out of covenant, when, not if, does the group know what to do to restore community? As Rumi wrote, even if you have broken your vows 100 times, come yet again come. To be a living and healthy community, we need to be intentional about how to bring people back into the circle of caring and begin again in love.